Линии боевого соприкосновения. Ну вот самая последняя информация, которую мне доложили буквально час назад. Сегодня ночью бойцы 810-й бригады пересекли границу Российской Федерации и Украины и вышли на территорию противника. И по всей линии боевого соприкосновения наши войска наступают.
The front lines in Ukraine seem stable and inflamed by positional battles, but the Russian army increases pressure on the remaining lines of Ukrainian defense. Steadily advancing, Russian forces are achieving one victory after another. Over the past day alone, Russian forces took control of several villages in all directions. This was the latest report from Russian media sources on the front. On February 21st, the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed the full control of the villages of Novosilka and Novo-Ochertovatovy on the southern Donbass front lines. After their victory in Velika Novoselka, Russian forces resumed offensives in different directions from the strategic stronghold. As a result of their advance to the north, they took control of Novo-Ochertovatovy. Russian assault groups are already fighting in Skudnoye and Dnepro-Energia nearby. West of Velika Novoselka, Russian forces took control of Novosilka, expanding their zone of control in the area. At the same time, the armed forces of the Russian Federation expanded their zone of control northwest of Velika Novoselka, advancing towards the villages of Berlatskoye and Privolnoye. Russian victories confirm that the ongoing offensive on the southern front lines is not aimed at distracting and containing Ukrainian reserves, but this is one of the strategically important directions where the destruction of the last lines of Ukrainian defense will offer the Russian army the wide room for maneuver in the Dnepropetrovsk region. And meanwhile, on the information front, the West has finally admitted the harsh lesson that they have learned from this Ukraine war. Cheap and easy to produce Russian equipment has proven itself during the conflict in Ukraine, unlike expensive Western ones. The lesson was reported by the publication Business Insider. In quotations, high-intensity conflicts involve large numbers of people and equipment, so not only quality but also quantity is required. Simple weapons played a big role in Ukraine, where inexpensive Russian drones destroyed European equipment worth millions of euros, the article says. It is noted that the Russian army also used glide bombs and loitering munitions, reserving precision munitions for more important targets. The author of the article emphasized that in the event of a full-scale clash with the Russian Federation, the West would quickly exhaust its stocks of weapons and equipment, without which it would not be able to conduct military operations. Earlier, more than half of the Polish population opposed the supply of weapons to Ukraine. Only 9% of respondents chose the definitely yes option. Then on the political front, former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev had some humorous statements to make to Washington ahead of Zelensky's official visit.
Дорогие друзья, завершается 2000...
Deputy Chairman of the Russian Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev, advised Washington in a message on his Telegram channel, and get this, to check toilets and other secluded corners of the White House after visits by Vladimir Zelensky. And I kid you not, my friends, here is a direct quote. When receiving this creature in the White House, one must then carefully inspect the toilets and other secluded corners, Medvedev wrote, hinting at the probable dependence of the head of the Kiev regime on narcotics.
Donor of military equipment to Ukraine, and we said that we would match or exceed that amount, almost 2.5 conversations.
This was reported by Russian media, RIA Novosti. So today's video will cover a brief frontline summary from Russian media before going into a deeper dive on this new Kursk escalation headed toward the Sumy region. Then we will look at the peace talks between Washington and Moscow with a very interesting insight from Russian sources. So my friends, now that full monetization is up and running on the channel, head over to the membership section. Avail yourself of countless hours of exclusive analysis, combat footage, and speeches that you will never see on mainstream media. I also connected my merch store to the channel, and there's a free shipping promotion event currently going on. Link is in the description. And don't forget to leave some super thanks love and a quick shout out to my newest channel members. Now let's get into it. Russian forces are grinding down the garrison of the AFU in the cauldron west of Kirakovi. The Russian flag is now waving in Ulakli as a result of heavy, prolonged battles. The Russian army gained new victories on the northern flank. The Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation officially confirmed the control of the village of Nazdezenka. The victory supports the further offensive towards the town of Novopavlivka. The Russian army is advancing on a wide front, destroying Ukrainian positions in the villages and surrounding Ukrainian stronghold in Preobrazhenka from the north and the south. Another Russian victory was officially confirmed east of Kursk. The Russian Ministry of Defense claimed the full control of Berezovka, located near the strategically important road from Kursk to Konstantinovka. Fighting in this area of the important road junction, Russian forces are also advancing in the eastern direction towards Toretsk. They are completing the mop-up operation in the area of Zelenoye Pole. Further Russian offensive threatens Ukrainian forces with encirclement in the area of the village of Sukaya Balka. The advancing Russian forces will soon straighten the front for their further assault on Konstantinovka. Amid the ongoing heavy battles in the center of Chasiv Yar, the newly shared footage showed Russian flag waving in Grigorovka, located on its northern outskirts. The Russian army is also pushing the northern Donbass front lines. According to preliminary reports, the village of Zeleny Gay came under Russian control. The settlement is located west of Sverdlikovo in the Kharkiv region. The armed forces of the Russian Federation are also increasing pressure on Ukrainian defense advancing towards Orekov. As a result of the recent assault on Pyatikati, they gained a foothold in the village and are repelling Ukrainian forces from the northern outskirts. The armed forces of Ukraine attempt counterattacks, but they are repelled. Now on the most interesting front, further up north, Russian media reports that Ukrainian control of Sudzha and its outskirts is the only trump card of the Kiev regime that Zelensky hopes to play when he's invited to the negotiating table. Ukraine is therefore wasting large forces, losing control of the Donbass in an attempt to save control of at least some Russian settlements for their further exchange. But Moscow insists that there will be no deal until Ukrainian soldiers are absent from Russian soil. Amid the prospects of a possible agreement with Washington, a decisive battle for the Kursk region could be expected in the near future. It may also become the final chord of the entire war. While Kiev was hunting for cannon fodder on the streets to throw into the Kursk cauldron, the Russian military has prepared its strategic reserve units, probably for a decisive offensive. On February 19th, Russian President Vladimir Putin noted that fighters from a Russian brigade crossed the state border and entered the territory of the Ukrainian Sumy region. Moscow is famous for playing diplomatic games. That's why the cross-border attack declared by the president, but not by military officials, was assessed as an important sign of a major Russian offensive in a new direction. Russian military reporters confirmed that indeed the 810th Brigade of the Russian Black Sea Fleet crossed the Ukrainian border on the same day. According to the latest reports, Russian forces launched attacks across the border from the recently liberated Russian village of Sverdlikovo. At the same time, Russian attacks were reported from the village of Nikolaevo Darino, from where Ukrainian forces were repelled back in January. As a result, they gained a foothold on the new front line in the Ukrainian village of Novenkoye. They already continue their further offensive on the village of Basovka. Obviously, the armed forces of Ukraine have a strong defense in the area in order to secure the main supply route to Sudzha. After the Russian breakthrough, the Ukrainian military command promptly deployed forces of the Special Group Alpha of the Security Service of Ukraine, reinforced with armored vehicles, to the area of Basovka. Heavy battles were reported in the area. No footage is yet to confirm a Russian foothold in the Sumy region, but the full Russian control of Sverdlikovo and their breakthrough are threatening the entire Ukrainian grouping with an operational encirclement in Sudzha. Russian maneuvers put additional pressure on Ukrainian communications. Even fire control of the routes will significantly complicate the supply, transfer of reserve forces, and coordination of the entire Ukrainian grouping in the Kursk region. In a dynamic combat situation, the Russian attacks destabilize the entire Ukrainian defense and facilitate their further offensives deep in Ukrainian territory. Now, on the geopolitical front, Russian experts write that the war with the United States started so many years ago is clearly lost, and now the US needs to withdraw and pretend that they had nothing to do with the fiasco. What it wants is Minsk 3.0, which leaves most geographic Ukraine intact, along with the investments of American companies like BlackRock. It is therefore trying to shift responsibility to Europe, as if this was always Europe's war instead of theirs. If Trump had wanted, he could have kept the peace by supporting Minsk 2.0 back then. Instead, he undermined that agreement, piling on sanctions on Russia and facilitating arms transfers that allowed Ukraine to build Europe's strongest, best equipped and trained army to carry out a final solution scheduled for 2022. Let us keep in mind that the peoples of Donbass and Luhansk were resisting the denial of their language and culture by a regime that had seized power illegitimately and which was trying to enforce its will by shelling civilian centers, killing women and children. While the peoples of the DPR and LPR had voted overwhelmingly for independence, Minsk 2.0 was a compromise guaranteeing their ethnic rights and local autonomy in a federal system controlled from Kiev. Kiev was an occupying power, 2/3 of their land, and there wasn't much the separatists could do until the Russians recognized their independence and came to their aid in 2022. Trump, they say, did not care about any of this during his first term, but now he doesn't have any choice to accept whatever the Russians offer him. Now, whenever the US starts talking about democracy, you know they are really talking about something else. They do not care about human rights in Europe, or at home even, and certainly not in Palestine. The US support for democracy in Europe means support for right-wing populist movements, similar in spirit to Trump's. They are also as tired of fighting a losing war as he is. That doesn't mean anything will improve under their rule any more than anything will improve under Trump's. Birds of a feather? Not exactly. Not all birds are equal. The European elites had thought they belonged to the American flock. Now they realize they were being raised for slaughter. The US is doing to Europe what it had hoped to do to Russia in the 20th century: balkanization and control, transnational rape. Europe was once a collection of small, ethnically defined kingdoms which became nation-states only in the 19th century. Now it is returning to that state. Europe doesn't have natural resources like Russia, but it does have a skilled workforce, technology, and capital, which the US wants to exploit. One Russian site analyzed Vice President J.D. Vance's recent speech this way. First, it is still too early to say which part of Ukrainian territory will remain under Russian control. Second, it is also too soon to determine what security guarantees Washington and its Western allies might offer Kiev. Third, the Trump administration aims to convince Putin that Russia can achieve more at the negotiating table than on the battlefield. Fourth, Moscow's current isolation from Western markets has made it a junior partner to Beijing. Fifth, it is not in Putin's interest to be the junior partner in an alliance with China. First, he responds, as far as for Russia is concerned, they will decide what parts of Ukraine they control. A lot of Russians want to incorporate almost all of Little Russia, leaving Galicia to the Poles, a neutral, landlocked buffer state. The four oblasts and Crimea, now part of the Russian Federation, are not up for discussion, but there is the entire area east of the Dnieper and the Black Sea Oblast, not to mention Kiev and other Russian-language areas, which will be offered referenda to choose as part of a surrender agreement and reconstitution of Ukraine. As the author writes, the Russians have advanced from the Kursk region across the border into Ukraine. You can expect them to liberate all of Kharkov and Sumy, he claims. On the second point, this is moot if the Kiev regime falls and Russia controls Ukraine directly or through a proxy Ukrainian government put together by someone like Medvedchuk, who is one of the few Ukrainian politicians to oppose the neo-Nazis. Little Russia can only have a future with Russian help, and the Russian federal system allows its republics considerable autonomy, more than they would under Western control. As to the third point, what could Putin gain at the negotiating table? Nothing much. Lifting sanctions would benefit American business more than Russia, which has used them to incentivize reindustrialization and economic and social growth. On the battlefield, Russia gains new citizens, skilled workers, and access to more than $1 trillion worth of untapped mineral wealth, hitherto not easily exploited, but now more accessible with modern technologies, such as Russia's new lithium processing tech, and the help of allies like China. Turkey is already signaling it wants a piece of the action. As to the fourth point, the US economic war on China and its attempts to restrict its access to resources makes Moscow an equal and not a junior partner to China. In addition, Russia's innovative progress has made huge progress in certain technologies, including quantum computing, the aforementioned lithium processing technology, metallurgical advances with aerospace applications, semiconductor fabrication, and defense. These are things that China needs, and China has much to offer in return as it faces Western threats in the Pacific. As to the fifth point, it is not in Russia's interest to be any kind of partner with the US, which cannot be relied on, having already cost Russia billions and hundreds of lives. Partners need to be responsible and trustworthy. China keeps its words. The US just changes its mind. Russia and China are civilizations. The US is just a corporation, the article writes.
You will see he looked at her. She gave a wave with her hand. He proceeded. She took a couple of steps, he stopped, and he waited for her to join. That was an optic to tell us that he then was going to bankrupt the U.S. corporation because it was the Vatican, the Crown, and the U.S. that was part since 1871. And we were giving you our tax dollars. We were paying back. You know, forget this Tea Party and without taxation, without representation. We owed you a lot of money because you helped us in the Civil War. And so that is what Trump has now, he told the Queen, I'm ending this. We're dissolving this corporation. We're going to go back to being a republic.
And lastly, Trump does not exactly inspire trust, writes Russian media. He is the contradiction in chief. He does not have dementia, but he's quite as demented as Joe. Russia is aware that while the US may withdraw from Ukraine, it is not talking, so far at least, about withdrawing troops or weapons from Europe or embargoing weapons to Europe. In fact, it is still encouraging Europe to fight on, and Russia is still the enemy to the east. Russia is also aware of the US's hostility for Russian allies like China and Iran, so important to the development of BRICS. And like the US, Russia is loyal to its agreements and faithful to its friends. Its contributions to BRICS are based on its reputation for even-handedness, transcultural respect, and honesty. But the US is the world's greatest terrorist state, which has managed to kill 20 to 30 million people since World War III. It has a long history of terrorism and subversion.
Ану. Вох! Що там, малий?
Шергую.